Hey Algebra 2. In this video we're going to be continuing graphing sine and cosine functions, but we are now going to be adding phase shifts and vertical shifts. So these are the two generalized equations for sine and cosine. We've already learned a couple of things about them. Let's get into it. We have our A, which is being multiplied on the outside of the function. A, if you remember, is the amplitude. Technically, it's the absolute value of A. That'll give us the amplitude. The B value, so when we're multiplying inside the parentheses by a B value, is going to be the period. It's going to give us the period. To get the period, we take 2 pi and we divide it by that B value. The distance between the key points is also using the period. So this is the distance between like the axis max, axis min, right? So what's that spacing? To figure that out, we take our period and we divide it by 4. Okay. So that'll give us the distance between the key points. The midline, or the sinusoidal axis, is going to be y equals whatever d is. So d, shifting it up or down, that's going to give us sinusoidal axis. So that'll be y equals d, and that means we're going up or down by that d value. And then finally, the phase shift. So the phase shift is going to be based on our C value. Okay, so if we have minus C, that means we are going right by that C value, and if we have plus C, then we are going left by that C amount. Okay, so these are all of the different key features of sine and cosine equations. Let's get into an example. So here we have y equals 3 times cosine of 2 times x plus pi over 2 plus 1. So this literally has everything happening in it. So what we're going to do is, like we talked about the other day, we want to label everything. So first of all, our axis, or I don't know where you want to start. I'm going to start with axis. So our axis is going to be y equals 1. Okay, so that's the sinusoidal axis. Our amplitude is going to be 3. That comes from multiplying. The period, to get our period, right, we're going to take 2 pi, we're going to divide it by b, or multiply by 1 over b. So in this case, it is 2. So the period for this is going to be pi. The phase shift, and this is where things get tricky, so the phase shift okay, so the phase shift is important because we have plus pi over 2, that means we are going left pi over 2. Okay. Now, the distance between our key points is our period divided by 4, so that's pi over 4. Okay, so what we're going to do now is figure out what the heck our scale is going to be, because we don't have a scale on the x-axis. So to get our scale, we look at the phase shift, and we look at the distance between the key points, and that's how we figure out our scale. The reason we need to look at both of these things is because we need to make sure that we can see that we're going left pi over 2, and then we need to make sure we can actually count out the distance of pi over 4. So finding a common denominator between these two is how we're going to find our scale. So since this is pi over 2 and this is pi over 4, the common denominator would be pi over 4. So that's what I'm going to make my scale when I am graphing. And I personally like to label every other if I can fit it. So I'm going to have this be pi over 4. So the 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, and then 7/4. And then the same thing going towards my negatives. Okay, so now that I have my scale, and even though I only labeled every other, right, this is pi over 4. So that's really helpful. And now we're going to plot our points. So when you're graphing, the first thing you really want to graph is our axis, because you don't want to mess that up, because that is where our midline is. That's where the middle, that's where the axis points are, right? So we're going to go to y equals 1, and I guess we can decide. No, I think we should keep our scale 1. Okay, so this is going to be y equals 1. Alright, so that's our axis. Now I'm going to plot our first point. Because this is cosine, right? Remember, cosine starts at the max, and we're going left pi over 2. So this is 1/4. This is 2/4 or pi over 2 to the left. And we start at the max, so I'm going to go up an amplitude amount. So we're going to go up to 1, 2, 3 above. So that means that the starting point here is negative pi over 2, comma 4. Okay. So that is the max. Our min is going to be below the axis by 3. So to get to our next key point, we have to go to the right by pi over 4. So that's this distance. So now we're at the axis. Go right pi over 4 and go down to the min. So 1, 2, 3 from the midline. Go right pi over 4 to the axis, right pi over 4 to the max. Axis, min, axis, max, axis. Now I want to do the same thing, so we need to take up the entire window. So axis, min, axis, max, axis. And then we are going to create our sine curve. Or, sorry, cosine curve. And don't forget your arrows. And there you have it. So we've successfully graphed everything and we labeled everything that's required. So let's do this one more time, this time doing sine. I would encourage you to try to do this one on your own. So if you want, you could pause the video and see if you could do this by yourself. So looking at the equation, my axis is going to be y equals negative 1. My amplitude is going to be 4. Our period is just going to be 2 pi because we don't have a b value for this one. The phase shift is going to be right by 3 pi over 2. The key point distance is going to be 2 pi, or period, divided by 4, so that is pi over 2. So then, to determine the scale, because we have a blank x-axis, we look at our phase shift, and we look at our distance between the key points, and we come up with a common denominator, which for this case is just pi over 2. So that's really nice. Okay, so let's label our coordinate plane then. So instead of having this be 1/4, I'm going to just start with pi over 2. So this is pi over 2. I don't know why I'm counting all of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pi over 2, 6 pi over 2, 7 pi over 2. I'm going to do every other this time. Okay, so there's my scale. Graph your axis. Let's make sure we don't mess that up. There's our midline of our sinusoidal axis. Alright, so now we have sine. Sine starts on the midline. We're going right by 3 pi over 2, so I'm going to go to the right 3 pi over 2 and plot my starting point. So starting point is at 3 pi over 2, comma -1. So sine starts on the axis and then goes to the max, so we're going to go right pi over 2, or yeah, key point distance is pi over 2, and we're going to go to the max, so up 1, 2, 3, 4. Back down to the axis, and then down to our min. 1, 2, 3, 4. Axis. And then following that pattern, going the other way. And then make my curve. And this time it's a sine curve. Make sure it looks like a sine curve and not just zigzags. Alright, and we've got everything graphed. So that is how you graph sine and cosine, including all of the different, I guess you could call them transformations. So period, phase shifts, vertical shifts.